You think about them at night, not because of who they were, but because of what they meant. They live somewhere between memory and myth, and you keep circling back. Not to the relationship itself, but to something deeper, older, and harder to name. The truth is, this wasn't just about love, it was about symbolism. You didn't fall for the person. You fell into a living archetype, one your soul had been unconsciously starving for. They became the hero in your hidden narrative, the muse your inner artist had long buried, the protector your inner child never had, the mirror reflecting back a soul you hadn't yet met. This is the territory Carl Jung called archetypal projection, the psychic act of placing sacred, timeless patterns onto human faces, not because you're deluded, but because your unconscious is trying to wake you up. That's why you felt magnetized, obsessed, seen, unraveled, as if the gods themselves had sent you a message wrapped in a body. And maybe they did. Neville Goddard would say, we never fall in love with the person. We fall in love with the state they activate within us, the frequency they unlock, the story they remind us is still alive inside. They became magnetic because we gave them meaning. So when you find yourself unable to forget them, realize it's not about them. It's about the self you tasted in their presence. This isn't irrational. This is an initiation. Your soul isn't broken. It's being summoned through the symbol of them, not to return to the past, but to remember a future you abandoned. Not to get them back, but to get yourself back. Because the archetype isn't finished with you yet. And until you reclaim what they carried, you'll keep circling the symbol, calling it love, calling it fate, but really answering your own soul's call. There is a particular kind of ache that doesn't fade with time. It lingers like perfume on the edge of memory. You find yourself thinking about them in quiet moments, not because the facts of your love were extraordinary, but because something unnameable happened between you. People say you're just idealizing them, as if longing could be reduced to a mistake. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if the intensity you felt wasn't delusion, but symbol? They weren't just a person. They became the setting of an inner myth, the place where the soul could finally tell a story it had buried for too long. You didn't fall in love with them. You fell into the story they let you live, a story where you were chosen, desired, understood, a story where something ancient stirred, maybe a hunger for safety or beauty or spiritual homecoming, and in their eyes it felt like that place existed. Carl Jung wrote that the psyche doesn't seek facts, it seeks meaning, and meaning, when unmet, becomes myth. So when the unconscious finds someone who carries the shape of that myth, even faintly, the projection is immediate, electric, and sacred. Neville Goddard would say, it wasn't their presence, but the state they activated. A frequency you once knew, or imagined, or hoped for, finally returned to your body. And that feeling was so powerful, you named it love. But here's the truth that doesn't arrive easily. Even if they disappear, the story stays. Even if they walk away, the archetype doesn't. You were in love with what they symbolized, a portal to the part of yourself you had nearly forgotten. That's why they still feel alive in your emotional body, not because of who they were, but because of what they touched. It's like falling in love with a constellation in the sky. You look up, heart wide open, forgetting that the stars are already dead, their light only now reaching your eyes. What you saw in them was ancient light. What you felt in them was already yours. The story they helped you feel, that was the soul's call, and it didn't end when they left. Because the story was never about them, it was about you. There's a silent grief that surfaces when we realize we didn't just miss someone. We missed a part of ourselves we only knew through them. They walked into your life and suddenly you felt radiant, expressive, alive in ways you hadn't dared to be. You felt beautiful, desired, heard, free. And for a moment, it seemed like they gave that to you. But beneath the surface, something more mysterious was happening. They weren't giving you anything new. They were wearing something you had long ago taken off. They carried your sensuality. They spoke with your buried voice. They walked with the confidence you silenced to survive. And so you loved them fiercely, not just because of who they were, but because of what they reminded you that you could be. Jung called this the projection of the unconscious self. It is not just desire that we place on others. It's the very essence of our unlived life, the strength we abandoned, the mystery we feared, the beauty we didn't think we deserved to claim. Neville Goddard, too, spoke of identity as a state. He would say, the version of you that came alive in their presence was not created by them. It was resurrected by the meaning you assigned to them. And so when they left, the emptiness didn't feel ordinary. It felt like something sacred had been lost. A temple collapsed, but it wasn't the person who was sacred. It was the part of your soul they mirrored. That's why you feel lost without them, not because they were your missing piece, but because they carried the part of you you were afraid to reclaim. It's like watching someone wear your crown while you forget it was made for you. And you thank them for their beauty, never realizing it was a reflection. They were a mirror. You were the source. The longing you feel now is not only for them, it's for the version of yourself that you finally saw, and then abandoned again. They show up in strange places, a song you haven't heard in years, a scent that drifts across your skin like memory. They appear in dreams, half shadowed, half smiling, not always speaking but stirring, and you wonder quietly, painfully, does this mean something? Are they trying to return? Is this fate? But the soul speaks in symbols, not confirmations. And what the unconscious repeats is not necessarily a message about the other, but a message about you. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious communicates through images, patterns, and archetypes. When someone lingers in your inner world, long after they've left your outer one, it doesn't mean they're your destiny. It means their symbol is not yet resolved. The dream is not about reunion. It is a sacred summons, the psyche pointing toward a forgotten temple. The person is just the veil. The true figure standing behind them is the archetype they carried. This is where longing becomes a spiritual language, and this is where modern mysticism often confuses the message. If I keep seeing signs, it must be meant to be. But the soul doesn't send signs to bind you to another person. It sends signs to reconnect you with what that person unlocked. Neville Goddard would say that everything we experience in the outer world is the echo of an inner state. So if they return in visions, it may not be because they're coming back. It may be because you haven't yet come back to yourself. They were the carrier of something sacred, a part of your essence that still waits at the threshold. It's like the old myths, where gods disguise themselves as strangers, testing the hearts of mortals, not to offer romance, but to awaken a slumbering divinity within. And so they return, in dream, in memory, in metaphor. Not because you are meant to chase them, but because you are meant to remember what they came to awaken. There's a quiet devastation in believing that someone else was the reason you once felt so alive. You replay the moments, the laughter, the electricity, the stillness that made time lose its shape, and the ache tells you, I'll never feel that again. But beneath that ache is a deeper truth. What you experienced in their presence was not given to you by them. It was called forth by something already inside you. They were the trigger, not the treasure. Neville Goddard reminds us that all outer experiences are expressions of inner states. What we fall in love with is not the external person, but the dimension of self we suddenly remember in their presence. You didn't need them to feel what you felt. You needed an image strong enough to awaken the forgotten frequency of your own soul. And they were that image, vivid, sacred, temporary. Not because they held the power, but because they held the mirror. Still, the illusion is tender. You chase the feeling back to its source, and it always points to them. But this is the deception of the heart, when it forgets its own origin. Carl Jung would say the psyche often gives away its gold, offering it to others who seem more worthy, not because they are, but because we don't yet know how to carry our radiance. So we pour it into a vessel, not realizing the wine is ours. This is the heartbreak that lingers, mistaking the cup for the spirit, believing the beauty was theirs, when it was actually yours all along. They were the instrument, you were the source. And the only way to stop craving their presence is to drink again from the well you thought they built, but that your soul had been guarding in silence, waiting for you to return. There is a strange kind of repetition that haunts us. You meet someone new, and yet the emotions feel recycled. The same ache, the same longing, the same wound, different face, same myth. This is not weakness. This is the unconscious trying again to resolve what was left unfinished. Carl Jung saw this as a law of the psyche, that what remains unintegrated must return again and again until it is remembered and reclaimed. You are not circling them because you cannot let go. You are circling the meaning they carried because it never became yours. They awoke an archetype in you, the lover, the healer, the sensual one, the sovereign. But when the relationship ended, you closed the door, and the archetype was left behind. So now the soul returns to the doorway, again and again, not to restore the romance, but to recover the self. This is why shallow advice often fails. Just move on. Cut the cord. But what if the cord doesn't lead to them? What if it leads back to you? Neville Goddard would remind us that the external is not the cause, it is the echo. If the echo repeats, it is because the inner sound remains unheard. It's like revisiting a house that no longer stands. You return, hoping to find it whole again, but the house is gone. Only the foundation remains. And beneath that foundation is the door you never opened, the part of you that was never chosen, the role you never stepped into. This cycle is not punishment, it is a sacred rhythm. The soul, circling not to suffer, but to remember. Because the archetype is still waiting, and it will not rest until it is lived. There are moments in life that feel like being caught in a storm you never meant to summon. A glance, a kiss, a single night that burns into the body like a lifetime. You called it love, but it wasn't gentle, it wasn't steady, it devoured you. And now, in the silence after it all collapsed, something still clings. A feeling too big to be explained, too powerful to be dismissed. Jung spoke of this as archetypal possession, when a person becomes overtaken by a force from the collective unconscious. Not just desire, but something mythic in scale. The soul projects an eternal pattern onto a mortal figure, and in doing so forgets the difference between human and God. They weren't your twin flame. They were the stage where the psyche reenacted a sacred drama, one it hadn't yet resolved. You mistook intensity for intimacy, fixation for fate, obsession for soul. And yet, when the dust settled, what remained was not love, it was collapse. Neville Goddard's vision of states can shed light here. The feeling you had wasn't caused by them. It was evoked by your internal world, which temporarily found an external mirror vivid enough to reflect it. But when the mirror shattered, the spell remained. This is the danger of projection, when the archetype is too strong and the ego too unrooted. You fall not into connection, but into possession. You lose the self in the image. And that's why it hurts in ways logic can't explain, because it wasn't a breakup. It was a disentangling from your own myth, like being under a spell cast not by them, but by the forgotten part of you that saw them and said, "There you are, I've been waiting." But they were only ever a veil, a sacred costume, a silhouette of what you most longed to remember. And until the archetype is claimed within, you may mistake every spell for salvation. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. There are eyes we remember not for how they looked, but for how they made us feel seen. You didn't just fall in love with a person, You fell into recognition, a reflection that made you feel for a moment like home wasn't a place. It was presence. But what if what you recognized wasn't them, but a part of you that had been waiting silently to return? Carl Jung described the soul's desire for wholeness as a guiding force behind all emotional intensity. We seek completion not through logic, but through projection, casting our own disowned essence onto another and calling it love. So when you looked at them and felt something missing come alive, it wasn't because they completed you. It was because they reflected a part of you you hadn't yet embodied. They didn't hold your other half. They held your mirror. And what hurts now is not just that they are gone. What hurts is that the part of yourself they illuminated feels gone too. You search for them in others, but beneath that search is a deeper quest to find again that fleeting sense of selfhood, wholeness, soul. Neville Goddard would say, "You were not drawn to the person, but to the state of being that you experienced in their presence. And that state was not given, it was remembered. But instead of integrating it, you externalized it. And now your heart still searches the world for someone to mirror it back." This is the tragedy of Narcissus, not vanity, but forgetting that the reflection is your own. Transfixed by the water, not realizing the ache was a longing to return to the self. So they became the image of something sacred. But the sacred was always yours. And until that reflection is welcomed home, the emptiness will echo with every name that is not your own. At some point, the ache softens, not because you forget them, but because something within begins to remember you. There comes a moment, quiet, unnoticed, when the soul stops searching for the mirror and begins to become the image it once saw reflected. What if the purpose was never to move on, but to move into what they carried for you? They were the container. You were the essence. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the integration of all fragmented aspects of the self, not by rejecting the projections, but by reclaiming them. And Neville Goddard offered the key: to inhabit the inner state that once felt unreachable. Healing, then, is not forgetting. It is remembering and becoming. You thought love meant needing them. But what if love, in its highest form, meant becoming the archetype you once gave away? If they embodied freedom, what if you were always meant to rise into your own liberation? If they awakened beauty, what if that beauty was the part of you waiting to be lived? The soul does not want reunion. It wants recognition. It wants embodiment. Like Inanna, who descended into the underworld for a love she could not hold, and rose not with the god she sought, but with the crown she had forgotten she already wore. This is the quiet truth behind the longing. You will stop circling them when you become what they symbolized, not because the story ends, but because the symbol has come home. You didn't fall in love with a person. You fell in love with the archetype your soul had been longing to touch. They appeared not just to offer connection, but to stir something ancient within you, the part of you that felt invisible, the part that needed to be heard, held, embodied. So the question was never, why can't I let them go? The deeper question is, what part of me still lives in their shadow? Because you weren't just grieving a relationship, you were grieving an encounter with your own unlived self. In their presence, something in you briefly awakened, a voice, a power, a softness, a fire. And when they left, you thought it left with them. But it didn't. It lives in you still, waiting not to be remembered through someone else, but to be lived fully in your own skin. Let the archetype return not through longing, but through embodiment. Not through the hope that they will come back, but through the quiet courage to become who they mirrored. Jung once wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." And Neville Goddard reminds us, we are always returning to our own imagined self. So maybe this was never about losing them. Maybe it was about remembering you through the sacred mirror they unknowingly held. And when that remembrance is complete, the story no longer circles, it opens, not into closure, but into homecoming.